My husband jumped on me when I asked for help with the baby. When I became a mom, I thought I knew what exhaustion was. But nothing could have prepared me for the sleepless nights, caring for a newborn, and feeling like I was doing it alone. I love my husband, but right now it feels like I'm drowning and he's just not there to pull me to the surface. We've been married for 7 years, and for most of that time we've been a great team. I've always been aware of his problems. He suffered unimaginable trauma as a teenager and takes medication at night to keep the nightmares from plaguing him. It's a tough trade-off. The medication allows him to sleep peacefully, but it also puts him into such a deep sleep that it's impossible to wake up. For years it helped, but now that our little one needs us at all hours of the day and night, it has become a wedge between us. At first, I tried to handle things on my own. I didn't want to resent him because logically I knew it wasn't his fault in any way. But logic can't handle screaming at 3 in the morning when the baby is crying and you're running on 3 hours of interrupted sleep. I fainted once. Just fainted. The scariest part was not the fall itself, but the thought that I could have been holding our daughter in my arms when it happened. That was my breaking point. I had to ask for help, even though I knew what it might cost him. I begged him to cut back on his medication, even just a little. He agreed, and for a few nights he tried. He would wake up, not getting enough sleep, but he was there, changing diapers and rocking our daughter to sleep. I finally felt like we were together. But then it all fell apart. One night, he became enraged in his sleep. Not figuratively, literally. I don't even think he realized it, but he pushed me off the bed with such force that I hit my head. I ended up with a bleeding cut and a bruised eyelid. When he woke up the next morning, he didn't remember anything about what had happened. He was horrified when I told him about it and apologized over and over again. But apologizing couldn't erase the horror I felt and the anger simmering underneath. I know it wasn't his fault in any way. I know that his injury, his medication, his sleep regimen are all out of his control. But knowing this doesn't prevent me from feeling abandoned. It doesn't stop bitterness from creeping into my soul every time I hear a baby crying and realize I'm alone again. We've talked about it since then, and he insists on going back to the full dose of the medication at bedtime. It's safer for all of us, but it feels like admitting defeat. At night, I have to struggle alone now. During the day, he's still a great dad, attentive, loving patient. But in the hours when I need him most, he's out of reach. And I can't shake the fear that one day my body will give up again. What will happen then? Who will be there for our baby? We have no family nearby. We're immigrants, living on what we can afford. Hiring help is not an option. This is our reality, and I don't know how to deal with it. I want to forgive him, forget about it, but I'm stuck. Every time I close my eyes, I see that night replaying in my head. The push, the fall, the helplessness. I love him. I want to be strong for him, for our child, for our family. But right now, I feel like I'm failing. How do I let it go? How do I move forward when I feel like the whole world is crushing me alone? Updated after that horrible incident, I couldn't go back to my old life. Despite all the explanations, rationalizations, and apologies, everything in my head was torn apart. How could I ever feel safe around him again if he was able to push me away so cruelly? How could I trust that his past wouldn't ruin our future? But time didn't stop, and I had to cope. Every day I woke up thinking that it would be another day of being alone. I couldn't figure out how to survive what had happened, and how to be strong for our daughter who needed both of us. The inner conflict between love and disappointment was tormenting me. My husband was a genuinely good man, but his dark past and what he was going through now was pulling us both down the abyss. I decided that I needed to make a change, and not just in regards to our marriage, but in the way I perceived the situation. One day, under the pressure of stress and sleepless nights, I realized that if I wanted to move forward, I needed to start finding solutions for myself. The first thing I did was to see a therapist. I knew it wouldn't solve all the problems, but I also realized that if I didn't learn how to deal with my emotions, nothing would work. The therapist helped me find new ways to manage my feelings, not to suppress them, but instead to learn how to work with them honestly. I realized that the pain I feel doesn't mean I'm weak or a failure. It's just part of what happens in our lives. I began to look for ways to rebuild trust in my husband, who, despite all the difficulties, was still my rock. We began to talk more openly about what was going on between us. I shared my fears and worries, and he opened up like he had never done before. We agreed that we would not hide our emotions and would work to make sure his illness did not become a stumbling block in our relationship. I asked him to find a specialist who could help him control his nocturnal episodes. I realized that not everything could be solved with pills, but the support of a professional could give us new tools to reduce the risk of such incidents in the future. He agreed and began attending additional therapy sessions. I also started looking into other options for help, such as overnight caregivers or help from local parenting organizations. While this didn't solve all problems, I realized that sometimes outside help is not a sign of weakness, but instead a way to become stronger. My life had changed. I no longer felt completely alone, although it was difficult at times. I learned how to ask for help, allow myself to rest, delegate tasks, and even say no. I realized that I could be strong even if I had to fall down sometimes. And that it's not how many times you fall, but how many times you get back up that matters. A few months later, when I was starting to feel a little more confident, my husband and I took a moment to talk again. This conversation wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I shared with him how much I missed his support, how hard it was to keep things bottled up, and how afraid I was that he would never be able to be there for me again in moments when I needed it so badly. He apologized over and over, but in his eyes I saw a sincere desire to change things. He promised that he would keep working on himself, and that he would do everything he could to support me despite the difficulties. While it wasn't a perfect solution, I felt it was a step forward. We weren't a perfect family, but we were a family learning to deal with challenges. And that was already a start. Updated. As I looked for ways to recover, I also began to realize how important it was that I find a balance between supporting my husband and taking care of myself. I knew that if I became completely consumed with his problems, I would lose myself and my ability to be a good mother to our daughter. At some point, I realized that my own needs and feelings were just as important as his struggle with PTSD. I started doing things for myself, even if it seemed selfish. I started carving out time for small walks outdoors, even if only for 20 minutes at a time. It gave me a chance to get some alone time with myself, to breathe, to clear my head. I could no longer continue to fight fatigue without doing anything for myself. So one evening as we sat in the kitchen, I decided to talk to my husband one more time. It was business as usual in our house. The washing machine was making noise, our daughter was playing in her room, and the evening light was falling outside the window. But I felt like this was a moment of truth. The moment when I could finally spill everything that had built up. And so I did. I can't hold it all in anymore, I told him, unable to hide my tears. I know you're struggling and I respect that, but I need more than that. I can't just be your rock anymore. I need you too. Not just during the day, but at night. I want you to be there when I'm scared, when I need someone to support me. He looked at me with a look so full of pain and regret it made me feel hard. I could see how much he hated to admit that his issues were becoming a stumbling block in our marriage, but he understood. It was the first time he didn't try to make excuses, didn't say that I can't or I'm not able to. Instead, he silently took my hand and said, "I'll try. We'll get through this together." I began to realize that recovery doesn't necessarily mean going back to the way things were before. Sometimes it means creating something new, something better adapted to our current realities. We began to find compromises. He continued to take his medication, but we found ways to adjust the dosage so he could be more involved at night. He signed up for more therapy sessions, and we found specialists who could help him with his nocturnal episodes without risking his health. I also signed up for parenting classes to learn how to manage stress and get the support he needed. We started working on having a support network, albeit virtual, of friends who could help at critical times. I realized that I couldn't expect one family or one person to shoulder the entire load. Our daughter, our home, our life, it's all of us, and together we can make it through. But the most important point I realized was that despite the challenges, our marriage was not a verdict. My husband and I were partners, and we had the strength to handle any difficulty, as long as we were both willing to work on ourselves and our attitudes. It wasn't just a battle against external circumstances, but an internal overcoming of the fears and resentment each of us faced. Over time, I felt not only trust but also hope gradually return. We were not perfect, but we were people who did not give up. We learned to accept that love is not always a perfect harmony, but a constant work on ourselves and each other. And although the road has been long and difficult, I believe that together we can overcome everything. Thank you for watching this video. I would appreciate it if you put a like and subscribe to the channel, as most likely this is not the end of the story. Before meeting